So hello and welcome to You Sew You. My name's Zoe and this is my channel about all the crafty bits and pieces I get up to. I knit, I sew, I spin on a drop spindle, I dabble in weaving from time to time, and anything else that takes my crafty fancy. Now this week we're looking at some weaving that I'm working on, so grab a brew, put your feet up and let's get started. Welcome back to any returning viewers, and to any new viewers a very warm welcome to you. This is the third part in my Weave With Me series where I'm working on a tapestry weaving that I've designed myself. So if you go to the link up here, if you haven't seen it already, there's a video on planning and designing the weaving as well as getting started. I'm keeping a little playlist going. But obviously if you have seen those videos already and you're weaving along with me, grab all your bits and pieces and we'll get started in just a second. And if you're working on any other craft and just looking for some company, that's cool too. So I'll switch the camera around and let's get going. Okay, so I've got all my bits and pieces prepared for this particular bit of weaving. I've got my beater and I've got my sock yarn and mohair that I'm going to hold together for the Tabby Weave for this particular hill. I've already sorted out a butterfly. It does work with the mohair in. I was a little bit concerned that the mohair might stick to itself, but so far so good with the butterfly. And I've also got this yarn and a butterfly prepared so that I can outline the hill afterwards. So I'll get hold of the loom and we'll get going with a bit of Tabby Weave. Okay, so here we have my Ryan knot fringe that I've done at the bottom. So we've got dark green sock yarn at this side and the lighter green held with the mohair at this side. So that's what we did in the last video. So as I say, you can feel free to go back and look at that if you want to see how to do Ryan knot fringing. And I'm going to do this hill in the same yarn as this side of the fringe, and then the sumac hill on this side I'm going to do in the darker green. Hopefully I've got enough left over. I'm a little concerned about that. And there might be some blending going on, but that's the good thing with weaving and crafts of any kind. You can change your plan as you go. The plan that I've got here, or cartoon as the weaving terminology goes, is a rough guideline. I'm not worrying too much, but I'm not hitting exactly on the lines. It's a map to get me to where I want to be. So you can see that I've marked in what I'm thinking for each section as I go my way up. And we're just going to take each hill in turn. So yeah, starting with this Tabby Weave here. Now Tabby or plain weave is the straightforward basic over under weave. Normally I would be resting the loom on my knees and then leaning against the table, which is why I've got this red cloth underneath to protect the table, because my loom has screws on the side. If you've got wooden sides on the loom, that's not going to be an issue, or a stand to put it on. So I'm doing a slightly different angle to normal so that I can show you what I'm doing. So making sure my Ryan knots are sitting nice and neatly and out of the way. So I've got my butterfly of the yarn with the mohair held into it. I'm just going to attach it into the warp to begin with. Now I tend to do my over-under going this way and then my open shed that way. I don't think it's a hard and fast rule as to how you're supposed to do it. That's just how I tend to do it. So I'm just going to secure the end of this butterfly first. I'm just going to pop it underneath, so through the open shed, underneath the top warps, and hold it down against the Ryan knot, and I'm just going to send the tails to the back. There are some people who say that you need to do your tapestry weaving from the back so that when you turn it round you see the picture on the front, which is great if you're just doing a plain weave the whole way through, that kind of thing. But when you've got things like Ryan knots and textures that you want showing on the front, it's a little bit more complex when you've got a cartoon attached to it. I mean, you can flip it around, so it's not impossible. But I personally prefer to work from the front so I can see what I'm doing, which means at the end, when I take the cartoon off and it's all woven, I'll flip it over and tidy up the backs before taking it off the loom. Whereas if you're doing it in the reverse, all your ends are facing towards you. So I would say it's probably a bit of personal preference, but yeah, there are people who say you're supposed to do it the other way around. Just so that you know when you're browsing YouTube's for videos. So we're now going to go from this end. We're going to take our outermost warp and we're just going to pick up the ones that are at the back and push down the ones that are at the front, so that we are going over the front warps and under the back ones. So I'm using the tail end of my beater to lift the warp threads to do that. If you have tapestry bobbins, your yarn will be attached to your tapestry bobbin rather than in a butterfly to go through here. Just a different method of managing your yarn. Because of the way the ryo knots have gone around multiple warps, just be careful to make sure that you are picking up and dropping down the side that you want to be picking up and dropping down each time, because the ryo knots will hold the warp into pairs when you've done it over 4 like I've done it, and you don't want to twist your warps up. You get yourself in a muddle. So just make sure that the warp threads that you're pushing down are the ones that are coming over the top of your loom. I'm running my finger up and down just to make sure that the warp is going over the frame at the top of the loom. That way I know which one's the top and which one's the bottom. They should be sitting pretty much one on top of the other, so you should be able to tell, but they are quite close together, so it's worth double checking if you're not 100% sure. So with the butterfly you can just pull the working yarn out of the butterfly itself when you need a little bit more length. With a tapestry bobbin you'd be unwinding it slightly. Don't worry too much. If you make a mistake, you can easily go back the way you came and undo anything. So I'm going to go all the way up to where that little line is, the green line is meeting the black line in terms of width, and just a smidge further to where the end of my ryo knots are, because obviously I'm a little bit below the black line. So I'm just using my lines as guidance. So that's my first pick in place, but I need to beat it down. So I'm going to just create little lumps, little bumps across the length with the yarn. That's going to help keep the tension fairly even. And then I'm just going to brush it down with my beater. You can see those ryo knots are condensing up as well as I do that. So the next pass is very straightforward. We're going through the open shed. So all we need to do is put our fingers underneath those front warp threads and lift them up and pass the butterfly underneath. Do that little section at a time. If you are on a longer tapestry bobbin, or if you're using a tapestry needle, you might find it easier to go through longer lengths, but it doesn't matter. You can do it a little bit at a time, or you can do it a large bit at a time, as long as you are knowing where you're going and not getting too muddled. So we're going to put it in on a bit of an angle, bring it down, and then again I'm going to grab my beater, create little hills and brush it down. So that's the 2 passes involved in plain weave. Now you're not going to be able to see it very clearly at the moment because it is condensing down into the top of those ryo knots. So I'm going to do a few more rows, stopping in line with the outline of this hill, and come back and show you what it looks like a little bit further on. Okay, so I've got a few rows of the tabby weave in now, and you can see how the mohair and the sock yarn are playing together as we build up the rows, but I'm also almost out of this butterfly, so I'm going to set up another one. I thought I'd show you how I do that. I think I have shown you before, but just in case you're only watching this video and not the previous one. I'm holding both strands of yarn together, but obviously if you're only using one strand, you do it in the same way. So I'm just going to hold the tail end of the yarn underneath those two fingers and make like a little rock sign. And I'm going to wind in a figure of 8 shape the yarn around the two horns of that sign until I've got as much as I want on there. I am okay with having a little bit less than I need for the full shape and having to add extra on. That's not going to cause me too much of an issue. So I'm just going to go until I feel it's like a sensible size for me to use. And if it ends up not being quite enough, that's fine. I just make another one later on. Okay, so that's going to do me for now. So I'm just going to take my little finger out and hold the middle while I take my big finger, my pointer finger out. And then I'm going to wrap a few times around the middle of that figure of 8. So it's got like a belt on. Then I'm going to make a loop. So I literally just put my fingers against the yarn, with it going around the outside of my pointer finger. My middle finger is on the top there. And I'm just going to flip it over, and I've made a loop just there. So I'm going to flip the end of my figure of 8 through that loop and pull it tight. Then I can cut the working yarn off, or at least the end that's on the balls of wool, and I can move those out of the way. Then when I'm ready to start that butterfly, when I get to the end of this one, which is very, very soon, it's all ready for me, and I'll be working with this end, not the end that's around the middle. I'm just going to pop that to one side and carry on with the under over pass. So each pass in weaving is referred to as a pick. So sometimes I'll say pass, sometimes I'll say pick. But yeah, they both mean the same thing effectively. So each row of weaving is made up of 2 picks in tapestry weaving. So you go one way, over, under, and through the open shed the other way. So the shed is the space between the warps. Open shed is when you don't have to do this picking up and pushing down thing that I'm doing at the moment. The up and down shed is called the closed shed. So when you pass it through between the 2 layers of warp threads, that's passing it through the shed. Now I have noticed, whilst I've been working with this sock yarn and mohair held together, that they're passing through the sheds at slightly different rates, which is not a massive surprise. They are very different yarns. So I was periodically making sure that they're sitting with each other, and I'm also holding the right hand side of the warps as I'm doing this. If I was coming from the other side, I'd be holding the left hand side, to try and keep the edge of the weaving as straight as possible, which is something I am working on. I do quite often end up with wobbly edges to my weaving, but practice makes progress. My personal philosophy is don't strive for perfection, you'll never get there. Strive for progress, and you never know where you end up. I'm probably going to get the whole way along this pick before I need to add in the new one, maybe part way back. I really ideally want to be changing the butterfly part way through a pick rather than at the end, mostly because when you're at the edges of your weaving and you're adding in and taking out bits of yarn, you've then got ends to deal with on the edge of your work, whereas if you're doing it part way along a pick, it's a bit easier to deal with. Some people just chop them off with like a bit like an inch or so of excess length. Some people weave them in. I do a bit of a mixture of both depending on the mood and what I'm wanting to use the weaving for. Okay, so we can see the line that I'm following here. So I'm just going to go under one more warp thread, and I'm just going to use my beater to hold the end warp whilst I even out those threads. So they've come in at an angle, loop them round, make my hills. Just make sure my warp threads aren't going to get pulled in too far at the right hand side, and brush them down. Now, we've not got very much of this butterfly left at all, but I am going to start the next pick with it, and then I'll add in the new butterfly so that I'm in the middle of my pick. I mean, yes, okay, I'm in the middle of the pick here, but it's a good habit, I think, to be in rather than worry about when you're doing it on a full width pick. So I'm just going to lay that across the shed part way. Do a few more. And for the moment, I'm just going to leave the ends at the front. Then I'm going to take my new butterfly and take the next batch of warp threads from the open shed, so the top layer, and pop the tail under there. Again, I'm just leaving it at the front for the moment. I'll deal with them in a minute. I'm just going to work this one all the way across. Okay, now in between these two tails, we've got one of the lower shed. Now this is the lower warp threads in this open shed. So this one is the one that the weft threads, the ones going this way, would need to be going over. So if I just pop these to the back now without doing anything with this warp thread, that thread is going to show through quite obviously. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pop this end over the top of it to the back, which is obviously much easier if you've got a loom stand or if it's resting on your knees, but it's not a big deal. And then this, I'm going to do the same with this end of weft thread. So it's going to go over this warp thread and through to the back. Now I know that means you've got two passing over the top of it in the same shed, which is not normally what you would do, but I find that that gives me the neatest result when I'm changing my threads. So I've got a little hill there already. I'm going to make some little hills down here and brush this warp down. I'm just going to give a gentle tug on the back of those weft tails that we put through, just to make sure that they're, because this one can go a bit loose otherwise, I'm just making sure they're sitting nice and evenly. And then we're going to carry on doing the plain weave with our new butterfly that is now attached to the weaving and being our active thread. So I'll come back to you a bit later on when I'm towards the top of the hill, if not all the way up. I'm just, as I say, following this line around. So at the moment my rows are stopping roughly one warp thread in from the previous row. Sometimes it'll be two. As I get to this point where the curve gets less diagonal, I'll be increasing the number of warp threads before I stop to speed that curve up. So I'll come back to you in a bit and show you how this hill is looking ready for outlining. So I'm just finishing up this plain weave tabby weave hill. As you can see, I've come to pretty much the green line on my design, fractionally over perhaps, but pretty much there. Just wanted to make sure that I had a curve going on as I came up here, and I'm finishing on a closed shed, so over under across the warts to get there. So I'm just going to beat that down. beat it to one side, and I'm just going to snip off what is left of that butterfly. I don't need that anymore, a tiny bit left. And I'm going to tuck that little bit behind my weaving, and I'll deal with that later. Okay, just another quick zhuzhing of it down. So now I'm going to outline this hill. I'm going to do this on all of my hills, so there's a bit of definition to the edge of them, stop the colours bleeding into one another, and sort of smooth off the edges, because it gets a little bit lumpy bumpy as you're coming around with the plain weave, and you're adjusting for where you want the end of your hill to be. So I've got my next yarn. Now this is, I think it's a Man Hasta Little Guy single that I've had for ages, and I've used most of it. It came in a set of minis. I've used most of it in various bits and bobs, but I've got a little bit left, so I'm going to use that for the outlining. Now I've finished on a closed shed because I'm going to start this on an open shed. So when I'm doing my open sheds, I'm going that way. When I do my closed sheds, I'm going that way. I suspect it doesn't particularly matter which way around you do it, but this is the way I've chosen to do it. And I wanted to make sure I've finished on a closed shed before I come in with an open shed, so that I'm not getting too much of the warp showing through where it crosses over, where the open shed crosses over this bit of closed shed. So I'm going to start over this side, and just as when I started the initial bit of weaving, I'm going to tuck the end underneath, just to deal with a minor little tangle there. So I'm just going to pop the end through underneath at this side so that it's out the way, and as I say, I'll deal with the ends later. Now I'm going to go through the open shed all the way along the edge of this green and mohair hill. The yarn isn't coping quite so well with the butterflies, a little bit of tangling and arguing going on. This is why I would quite like to get some tapestry bobbins at some point, because with the yarn being wound around the tapestry bobbin, you're not going to have the same tangling issue as you get sometimes with the butterfly. It very much depends on if you pull it in the right direction the first time, and what the yarn is like. So I'm just pulling my butterfly apart at the moment so I can sort it out later on. I've not got too much yarn here, so it's not going to be too much of a problem to put it through loose. Okay, so that's my first pick in place. I'm going to need to beat this down as well. I'm just going to deal with this tangle if I can. There we go. And I'll re-butterfly this later before I do the next outline. Okay, so I'm just going to make sure I've got plenty of give there. Again, I'm going to put it down in little bits and then just beat or brush it into place. The next part is going to be a closed shed. Now, you can see some of these warps are looking quite prominent at the moment. I'm not overly concerned about that because in the grand scheme of things they're going to disappear. I just didn't want a straight line of it here. It's just because of the way the open shed closed shed works, as you go across and you're not going like directly across when you're outlining. So working through the closed shed, hopefully we'll start to minimise some of those visible warps. We can with beating down as well, and as we put in the later picks, that will help too. So I'm going to go all the way across, back down to here, through the closed shed. So obviously we've got a contrast of textures going on here because this single is much smoother than the mohair. However, singles do quite often pill, so we're getting a little bit of pilling happening as we're running the yarn through the closed shed. Again, I'm not overly concerned about that for the purposes of this particular weaving. I did want to play around a bit with textures, so these little nubs that we're getting from the pilling, just adding to that texture, so it's fine. So under, over, all the way across. See, my butterfly has totally died on me. That happens sometimes. Don't worry about it. You can stop at any point and fix your butterflies. I'll do this off camera though. There's not that much yarn there that I'm going to have a problem pulling it through unwound. And quite often when I'm getting towards the end of my butterflies, I'll just let them come apart anyway. It just means that you don't have miles and miles of yarn waving around as you're weaving it. By having them in the butterflies, it just makes it a little bit easier to manage when you've got larger amounts. But yeah, for small amounts it's not an issue. Okay, so there we are, back at the start of the outline. I'm just going to beat this down nice and firmly so that we can minimise those visible warps. As I say, as we're beating in subsequent rows, that's also going to help with that. So we've got a nice outline on the edge of this particular hill, so it's going to, as I say, distinguish it from the hills on either side. But we don't want to leave our outline yarn down here, because we're going to also need to use it to outline this next hill when we put it in. It's going to blend fairly nicely with the next hill actually. It's a bit bluer than the green that I'm going to be starting this hill with, but similar sort of value. So we're actually going to need to come back up to here so that this yarn is ready to start going over there. I mean, I will obviously need to add in more yarn whilst I'm doing it, but that's fine. That's not a problem. We've already seen how to do that. So we're back to the open shed. So come back up. And I'm just going to make sure that we're going under just the ones we need. I don't want it to go under where the dark green rye knot is. I want it to go under just the ones for this hill that I've worked already. And we're going to take it just past where that line is. That way it is going to sit nice and ready. So then we're going to 3. So yeah, it's going to be nice and ready for when we're coming across here. So yes, I'm just past the line there. So we're going to beat this one down, same as we did before. Again, nice and firmly to make sure we are minimising any visible warp. And also because we've got an extra pick on this section here. Okay, so that's my outlining done. That's my first hill complete. And we're ready to work the sumac, which I'll do in my next weaving video. So if you're weaving along with me, let me know down in the comments below how you're getting on with your project. And if you're doing any other craft as well, that's fine too. Let me know what you're up to, because I'm nosy that way. Now, I aim to put a video out every week, so once a month is a roundup of the projects that I've been working on the previous month. And in between times, it's videos a bit more like this, where I'm looking at a particular project or a particular skill or technique in all sorts of different crafts. So it'll be every few weeks or so that I do a weaving video. So yeah, like and subscribe down below and ding the bell for notifications if you want to follow along with this project, or if you just want to hang out. Either's fine. I'd love to have you here. And I look forward to seeing you in my next video. But in the meantime, happy crafting and bye-bye for now.